This story happened in October of 2016. For context, I lived in Fargo. I am a 30-year-old male, but back then I was 22 and was still living with my parents and two brothers, Tommy and Andrew. One weekend, my brothers and I decided to go on a getaway that was 2 hours away from Fargo. We wanted to get out of the city and away from our nagging parents, so we decided to book a spacious Airbnb for a decent price that was located in a forest. We packed our backpacks, got in my truck, and headed over. When we got there, the host greeted us and left us the keys. The weather was perfect, and the view of the yellow autumn leaves on all the trees was stunning. On the first night, we decided to take a nice long walk in the forest. While hiking through the trees, we made small talk and generally explored the area. Soon, it became dark. I don't know about Tom and Andrew, but I'm easily creeped out by the dark alone. But being in a forest, no way. Guys, maybe we should head back to the rental, yeah? It's getting creepy out here. Then suddenly, a loud growl came from somewhere nearby. It sounded human, yet animalistic at the same time. What the fuck was that? I don't know, but we're not sticking around to find out. We then heard something speeding toward us. Shit! I hear something heading toward us. Let's get out of here quick. When I looked behind us, I saw a figure of what looked like a man coming out of the tree line. But here's the thing. It seemed way too tall. The shoulders were weirdly shaped. They were almost like arches. We got back to our Airbnb and locked the door, but it wasn't over yet. At around 1 a.m., we had calmed down enough to call it a night. But I was still paranoid. I couldn't get the image of the figure I saw out of my mind. Was it a man? If so, was he wearing some kind of costume? Could he be a part of a cult? Could there be others hiding out in the forest? Did our Airbnb host set us up? I got up and double-checked the house to make sure all the windows and doors were locked. I eventually went to bed, but I had trouble falling asleep. Out of random curiosity, I looked out my bedroom window, and I noticed a black dog under the dim driveway lamp. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but the more I looked at it, the more creeped out I got. The dog appeared to be looking right at me, not moving a muscle. What happened next was simply unbelievable. Its eyes began to glow red, and then it stood on its hind legs. Its stance became kangaroo-like before it took on a humanoid appearance with long, sharp fingernails. I freaked out and quickly closed the blinds. My brothers heard me screaming. Josh, what's wrong with you? I saw something in the driveway. At first it was a dog, and then it became, I don't know, something else. They didn't believe me at first, but they quickly changed their minds when they heard that same deep growl we heard out in the forest. But this time, it was coming from just outside the front door. Something then began to strike the door over and over again. All three of us were freaking out and trying to look for a weapon in case that thing managed to break in. Thankfully, the door was solid wood. Eventually, all fell silent. My brothers and I stayed up for the rest of the night. The next morning, we got back in my truck and got the hell out of there. On the way out, I saw that same strange dog, its eyes following my truck as we tore off down the road. Our Airbnb host obviously didn't believe a word of what we said and never gave us a refund. But ultimately, I'm just glad we made it out of there alive. When I was in my early 20s, I was living in Chicago and I wasn't making that much money. When I found this apartment, it was too good to be true. The top floor was a duplex with 6 rooms for $775. The agent who showed me this apartment stressed to me that the landlords were very religious. I didn't have an issue with that, even if it did sound a bit ominous. The landlords were an elderly couple that lived downstairs. At first, they seemed okay. When I would see them in the yard, they would smile at me. But when they saw that I was having my boyfriend over, things started to get really strange. One day I was in my office writing, and I hear a knock at the door. I open up, and it's the old lady from downstairs. Before I could even say hello, she asked me if I ever got an abortion. I shut the door in her face. No thanks. This was a colossal mistake. The layout of the house was a bit odd. There was a door at the bottom of a flight of stairs. It was always locked. Unfortunately, I found out the hard way that it led directly into my landlord's living room. One day I was in my kitchen, cooking. My boyfriend was at work, and I was by myself when I heard what sounded like the click of a door. Okay, what the fuck was that? I walked into the hallway and looked around. I didn't see anyone. I poked my head into all the rooms. Nobody was there. I then looked down the staircase, and there was the neighbor lady, standing there, staring back at me. I screamed. She flinched and stepped back into her apartment, swinging the door shut. After that incident, I spent every possible moment away from the house I could. I would come back and discover that something had been moved. A window would be shut once the shower was dripping and my towel was damp. I couldn't lock that downstairs door. Since it was technically a door to their house, they were the only ones with the key. The knocking became frequent, 3 or 4 times a day. My boyfriend and I propped up an old mattress so we wouldn't have to hear it while we slept. The second to last straw was when I opened the door for work and the stairs were gone. I physically could not leave my house. They had been dismantled and were sitting on their porch. I called them repeatedly, but they did not answer. Finally, their son came out of the house and explained that they were doing some remodeling. He told me that I had to cut through their apartment downstairs. So I descended the staircase, opened the door, and they were both sitting at their filthy kitchen table, staring at me. The phone was ringing in its cradle. They must have heard it, but they kept staring at me with this blank look on their faces. I crossed their kitchen and left out the back door. A few days later, I came home from my job and noticed the bathroom floor was almost completely flooded, like somebody had left the faucet on. The old woman, seeing that I had come home, came up the stairs and knocked, screaming at me that I had flooded the bathroom and that her son would have to come and fix it. I was so exhausted at this point that I just said it was okay. Her son comes by a few hours later, and he's completely shit-faced. I open the door and tell him that I needed an hour or so. He then picks something up and swings it at me. It was a massive wrench. I somehow ducked out of the way before he stumbles over. I then pushed past him and booked it down the newly repaired stairs as quickly as I could and called the police. They come by and take down the complaint, but since there was no physical contact, they couldn't do anything. I later discovered that this old couple had a daughter on the force. In the middle of the night, myself, my boyfriend, and several of his friends packed up all of our stuff into a Chevy Astro. We lived in hotels and out of our vehicles for a month, until we found a new place. That old couple never attempted to contact us again. This past New Year was my 4th year anniversary with my boyfriend. We typically don't do much. So this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. We found a cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub, and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. You had to drive down a small private road that ended in a roundabout. Off this roundabout was a long uphill driveway that led to our cabin. When we got to the cabin, it was snowy and scenic. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, and you had to enter through some stairs in the back. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all the information outlined. The book stated that during the winter season, to not be surprised if their contracted snowplower showed up to clear off the driveway. Alright, sounds good to me. We unpacked and realized that there was no cell service, but there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed it to be. We planned to spend the next day in town. I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed for dinner. Dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne and hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped, and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of white. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. It was at that point my boyfriend stopped the car and asked me if I had noticed the new tire tracks on the ground. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard these new tire tracks, but there they were. We remembered that the snowplowers could have stopped by, but the issue was that we saw these tire tracks because of the snow, and who plows in the dark? We also knew that once we were at the cabin, there would be no cell service. So we figured that we would head back into town and message our Airbnb hosts and ask if they or one of their friends had stopped by the cabin. We waited for a while in town for a reply, but we never heard back. We could have called, but at that point it was past 10 o'clock, and we didn't want to be discourteous. We figured that we had blown the whole thing out of proportion, and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I was big into true crime and horror movies, and was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back, and this time we actually drove up the driveway, towards the top of the hill. That's when I noticed something. My stomach dropped when I saw the footprints in the snow. We backed down the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had drove up the driveway, reversed down, parked, then got out of their car, and walked onto the property. This property was quite large, with tons of trees and bushes, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment we saw them, we decided to call the police. We figured it was better safe than sorry. We would just have an officer go onto the property with us, just to check everything out. We drove back down the driveway until we got service again. We then called the police, explained to them the situation, and waited for their arrival. A police officer showed up, and we followed him onto the property. The officer scanned the property and determined that there was no one there. Obviously, we were a bit shaken up, and kind of embarrassed. We thanked him as he left. Needless to say, we no longer wanted to get into the hot tub and look out into the dark forest. Instead, we locked ourselves inside and watched a movie, with no champagne. We were both tired from the day and passed out pretty quickly. At 3 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with all the lights and TV on. As my boyfriend went to go brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It only lasted a few seconds. We both looked at each other and froze. It was the garage door. There are only very few reasons that someone would need to open a garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 o'clock in the morning. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew we were here, and they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and dialed 911. As I sat on the phone talking to the operator, we heard a bang on the balcony. as if someone threw something up onto it. I was losing my absolute shit when the operator told me the police were on their way. We sat crouched in the cabin, hoping the police would show up in time. Suddenly, we saw the police lights in the driveway. They exited their cars and began searching the property. Soon, we heard them knocking at the door. There were 2 policemen, the one in front of us, and the other a bit behind, still looking around the yard. I immediately noticed that the officer in the back was the one who came out on the first call. They told us that not only was the garage door shut, it was locked. Again, there were no signs of anyone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the officer said that the road conditions were too dangerous at that time. I looked at the officer who had come out to the property twice, and I felt that I deeply disappointed him. We went back inside, again, locking all the doors, and then went to bed. The next day we were leaving. We didn't feel right in the cabin anymore, and I just wanted to get out of there. As we packed, we heard the same noise. It was the fucking heater. A heater that sounds just like a garage door opening. My boyfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows." As for the banging on the balcony, it was just a perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I think back on this story and I'm embarrassed, but I'm also incredibly grateful for some reason. We were wrong about the garage door opening, and maybe I was being a bit too paranoid. But the tire tracks and footprints we saw were there. For all we know, there could have been somebody out there, watching us. Hey everyone, this is your Uncle Unit. Thank you so much for checking out my video. If you have a story that you would like me to narrate on this channel, please send it to my email, unit522submit@gmail.com. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. And if you would like to support this channel even further, you can check out my merch store. There's a link for that in the description. I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you stay tuned for the next video. Until then, never forget. There's